you could do much different from what the present government has done. Granted that the present government has acted in a more precipitate way.
1.5 trillion pounds.
And so certain things which might possibly have been handled more smoothly over a longer period have been faced more quickly. The difficulty was that I guess you could say that those very sectors of Britain's economy have been in a long period of decline.
I don't know who the fuck we owe that to, but surely they've gave up on it, surely.
Which started before the Second World War. They got a temporary boost from the conditions immediately after the Second World War. Problems really were never got to grips with, and it's not clear to me that it really does politically to point the finger at Mrs. Thatcher and say how terrible these things are, when it's just not clear that there really is an alternative.
Which I know very well, so I've lived in London most of my grown-up life.
And I think he just continues to incite hatred and prejudice, and I think he should apologise.
The military were called in to seek their mountain hideouts. Troop-carrying planes and paratroops went into action over the treacherous country where the Hers were known to be.
Happy Pride, everybody!
Britain has embraced same-sex marriage. The centre ground of opinion in 21st century Britain is increasingly liberal.
All too soon, over the general chatter and clink of glasses, you hear the landlord call, "Time, gentlemen, please." It's time to say goodnight to the new friends who will always welcome your return.
Do you have any country you don't like?
England.
Why?
I just don't like it. It's cold, you know. Yeah, it's dumb, cloudy, not nice people.
And nowadays, obviously, over the years and whatnot, the Asian population has obviously increased, and the demand for Asian businesses and the sweets, savouries, jewellery, gold, and obviously the saris and bridal wear has obviously increased and increased more businesses themselves. My impression of Burger Bread is obviously it's the best place in the world. You can't go around, it's mini India, put it that way. Why go anywhere else when you can come straight to Burger Bread?
Don't you smoke?
In Islam, you know, it's a fundamental thing that you're supposed to respect the rights of the country in which you live. So if you live in a country that permits homosexuality, that's got nothing to do with you. If somebody else is gay, you've got no right to talk about their life.
They outnumber us by about 3 to 1. But what do you think? Now that's important.
When you walk along, you don't hear English spoken, do you? You know, it's like being in a foreign country sometimes.
I love them. I do, really do.
They're very fascinating.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. Listen to them jabber and everything else.
Yeah.
You get a good laugh out of some of them.
In the 1980s, the Labour Party believed that the poor, who did not deserve to be poor, should be helped by the rich, who did not deserve to be rich.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the issues to emerge with COVID is the apparent difference in rates and severity for different ethnic groups. Generalising, if you're from a black and minority ethnic background, you're at greater risk when it comes to COVID.
For a clearer vision of who we are will allow us to survey what options are realistically open to us. So the seeker of his truest, strongest, deepest self, wrote William James, must review the list carefully and pick out the one on which to stake his salvation. All other selves thereupon become unreal.
For over 40 years, Mike Sheehan has pedalled and walked with the post anything up to 30 miles a day around this area of Goleen in West Cork. In all that time, he's hardly ever been outside the district, but his friends calculate he has worn out a total of 22 bikes, 96 pairs of tyres, 240 pairs of brake pads, and that at a conservative minimum he has cycled the equivalent of 10 times around the equator, just doing his job. All that by simply following the same unchanging route day after day.
They came by air and by sea, clutching what few possessions they could in their rush to safety. For a few there was a ready home, relatives in earlier years who'd set roots in Britain. But for the majority, it was utter confusion. A temporary home in one of the many relocation centres, hastily thrown up around the country. For some, destination was largely down to fate.
Well, Bob, there must be a reason. Why do people join the National Front? I think it's because of the disillusionment.
We wear dark clothes, trousers, no skirts, no obvious makeup. Red lipstick is out of the question. We erase ourselves, try to be the most discreet possible. Why?
That they have with the Labour Party and with the borough councils in particular.
Because we're scared, simple as that.
I mean, I have no doubt that there were many in the city and many within the Labour Party who were concerned about the scale of the change that was about to happen.
This is Allah's planning. They plan and plot, Allah too plans, Allah is the best of planners. Allah says in Surah Imran chapter number 3 verse number 54, Makru makrallah wallahu khairul makirin. They planned and plotted, Allah too planned. Allah is the best of planners.
If we can go back to 1972, Leicester City Council took out an advertisement in the Ugandan press which advised people not to come to Leicester. Do you think this reflected the view of the Labour Party hierarchy, and to what extent was this a widely shared view?
I think it represented the view of a number in the council leadership.
Because we're scared, simple as that.
That those who had been involved in placing the advert were ousted by a new generation of leaders. Jim Marshall, who'd been opposed to the placing of the advert, was elected as the new leader of the incoming administration, and Ted Marston found himself relegated to the backbenches and I think perhaps retired from the council not too long afterwards.
And this reminds me of Ewan Redley, who was another white journalist from UK who was taken as a hostage by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And when she was released, she openly praised the Taliban.
Very controversial within the Labour Party, but something that those of us who were just then making our mark in the party very quickly put right.
With the Labour Party and with the borough councils in particular.
I think perhaps they looked at it negatively.
I don't like. That's a tough one. Like, every country has their own beauty. I don't really think I have an answer for that.
That was a good answer.
Thank you.
There's that thing where if you see a girl on road with a hijab, you're going to think she's a good girl, allow her, right? If you see a girl on road with her hair showing or some tight jeans, you automatically think, right, she's on it. Yeah, exactly, so...
We wear dark clothes, trousers, no skirts, no obvious makeup. Red lipstick is out of the question.
What was about to happen to Leicester was something that would change.
People smuggling is a wicked and vicious activity that puts lives at risk.
The new arrivals would quickly blend in with their neighbours. It was, after all, something they'd had to do before.
These people who are coming here, they have already proven, you know, in the East African countries that they are very intelligent, they are very capable of looking after themselves, and I'm sure they'll do the same here.
And that's precisely what they did do. This street in the Belgrave area of Leicester is a monument to their success.
Look at the state of you. Look at the state of that. Kids and everything come up and down this road. Look at you. You're lucky I don't throw you over there in that full water. You fucking disgraces. Look at the state of you. You put yourself in this situation. It's nobody else's fault apart from your sins. You're in a public place, go in your little smack den and do it. Not in a public place, you dirty bastard. You're going all over Facebook. Facebook famous.
Thinks I'm looking after you. Up you go. Double up, double up.
The trenches weren't in one straight line. They were built on what they call a traverse system.
Yes, they're average, but the schools are a bit overcrowded.
Did they stay to school dinner?
No, I'm afraid there's not room for them.
But history is very rarely a simple case of black and white, literally or metaphorically. A proper appreciation of history is dependent on understanding the past was as complex as the present. The humanity is both flawed and capable of greatness. Take the British Empire, for example.
In every human society, there are extremists.
They are liberals, they are extremists, and bulk of the people are moderates.
They can't cope with the amount of meals. There's no way to sit the children.
There are two landmark dates from where Islamophobia has grown. One was Salman Rushdie's book in 1989, roughly. And secondly, it was after 9/11.
Although several captures were made, the authorities were determined to stamp out this Ku Klux Klan of the Northwest.
So they have to deal with the very needy cases, people who are on assistance.
I find this, secular extremism.
Oh, they have to see to those first.
It really is against, you see, the whole idea about idea behind secularism is liberalism.
So if yours had, some other child might have to go without, I suppose.
Well, they would. They'd be deprived, whereas I could give them a meal if they came home.
You want humans to basically, be free to express the way they want to be, as long as it doesn't cause pain and hurt to other human beings. That's how I understand what liberalism is.
Do you think, on the whole, you're better or worse off than most of the people around?
God is the great. Yes. What we're doing wrong, seen. Good. What we're doing bad, yes, seen. So it is our religious duty.
I don't know. In some cases where people are on relief or assistance, they're drawing more than my husband is going to work.
And then the next thing you know is your child is dealing drugs.
Which is annoying. But my husband would sooner take a job for £10 a week than go on the assistance or the dole.
So if someone covers their hair, their head, why has it become such a big issue? And I feel this is just a symptom. The main reason behind this becoming such a big issue is because of the way Islam is perceived. And that's why that understanding has to take place.
Now, we have to attack what we perceive as being patriarchal culture, coming into any culture that isn't patriarchal, and making sure we tell people not to be like that. But we should be careful in this country before we rest on our laurels when 2 women are murdered every week in this country.
So is that not racism? Disregarding my question merely because of the color of my skin? To be honest, after enduring a year of the people in charge telling me that I'm a racist and I'm privileged and pointing out our irreversible differences, I've never noticed race more. And it's becoming the first thing I notice when I meet someone, which has never before been the case.
Okay. And I'll add here one little brief point, and that is, in a sense, this is touching on something that I'm going to be focusing on in Thursday's lecture. And that's the idea that to many people, and you'll hear it sort of underlying what he's saying here, to many people, their individual colony really was what felt to them like their country. And people often referred to, Jefferson called Virginia my country well into the 1790s, if not beyond.
And if it's been told again and again and again that we start to believe it, we need to actually look at what's happening on our streets. We see all kinds of people interacting with each other.
So you'll be hearing how people really feel about their colony versus those other foreign colonies that people often felt as though they were different countries with strange habits and weird speech patterns. So you'll kind of hear that beneath what I'm going to read here.
It's really annoying because anyone who's sort of grown up in a working class community knows that most of the people that are actually interacting with people of colour are the white working class. Let's talk about that. A lot of us are from multiracial families.
I'm prejudiced against both white people and Negroes.
How can Americans be for and against Africans at the same time?
A sure sign of an inferiority complex.
And I agree wholeheartedly with Gopi, and I would like to emphasize that it's usually connected with animate objects. Like one doesn't go into a shop and see a dress and say, a dress, it must be cotton, all dresses are cotton. But one might well say, oh, that man's a merchant, all merchants are bad, therefore that man is bad. And I feel that's done a lot in nationwide relations, which is what Gopi was saying.
How could they be objective about African Negroes while they are prejudiced against American Negroes?
I disagree with you completely. I think that Americans are prejudiced for African natives and are very prejudiced against white people in Africa.
Well, a family, the father's very ill, and they pray, well, he may get well, and he dies. Well, I found families like that who've lost complete faith because they've been so religious and they've been taught by the priest that you make this certain sacrifice and the patient will get well, or you give so much money to the poor and the patient will get well, and he dies. And they don't lose faith. They still believe in God. They still do the same thing the next time. Why do we do that?
The holding of an opinion without certifying its correctness. It is part of human nature. It can be very dangerous if it is used for personal ends or for exploitation of the masses. But in its essence, prejudice is something that is part of human nature, and so it serves a useful end.
Well, I think prejudice is some sort of an opinion formed beforehand and not taking time out to judge fairly. And its basis is mostly emotion, as Amin said.
I'm prejudiced against both white people and Negroes.
But you can't, I mean, for example, if you met a friend who always disappointed you time after time, you're very good friends, and every time you're disappointed, and then you'll find that you no longer depend on that person. At the same time, in this life, we are disappointed so many times by God, but we still depend on Him. We still hope that we always think He'll grant our wishes.
First of all, how can you be disappointed by God?
God is the great. Yes. What we're doing wrong, seen. Good. What we're doing bad, is seen. So it is our religious duty.
Drinking is prohibited in our religion. But when our peoples just came in this country, due to the weather of this country, they are not that drunker, but they drink. Not too much, just 2-3 bottles in a week or 2-3 pints in a week. Due to this weather, you see.
And then the next thing you know is your child is dealing drugs.
Parents don't know how to deal with this. This is not something they've encountered before. This is a British problem.
Today's report says the 19-year-old steward, Mohammed Aga, fobbed Mr. Wilde off and bears personal responsibility for the striking missed opportunity.
Does the Minister recognise the public anger at us being made fools of in this? Border Force is little more than a taxi service for illegal migrants. It's ridiculous. So will the Minister assure me that he will use his powers under the 1971 Immigration Act to arrest all illegal immigrants, put them in detention, prosecute them, imprison them and deport them so that we can stop this horrible trade dead in its tracks?
I know that you white people will use me for security purposes. Fuck you!
Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London. It's the living embodiment of freedom of speech.
This is the reality of life and free speech.
If one went wary of talking about conspiracy, one would say that there was clearly a conspiracy against blacks in this country. Because in all parts of this country that you look, they're looking at Brook Grove in London, or Brixton in London, or Moss Side in Manchester, or Handsworth in Birmingham. In all the parts that you look at, it's clear that the state, at top national level and certainly at local level, the state has moved to manipulate blacks in any way that it's wanted to. In this area, this used to be called in those days Brown Town, because a lot of black people had settled in this area.
The new community that has come from the Horn of Africa, or from anywhere in Africa, they've come because they've fled conflict, war. They have come without a strong educational background themselves.
And when it comes to sensitive matters around political violence and indeed suicide bombing, well, 4% of Muslims would have some sympathy for both those things as against only 1% of the wider public. That could mean no more than a handful. And let's just put that into context for a second. 4% implies that just over 100,000 Muslims in the United Kingdom have some form of sympathy with violent acts.
I mean, they're my friends. I mean, that's the simplest thing. My friends are my colleagues. You know,
they have with the Labour Party and with the borough councils in particular.
If you want to change something, you have to be a part of something. You have to get involved, you have to educate yourself on it, and you have to make a change from inside. It's all good and well having opinions saying no one listens, but if you're not there to be listened to, who's going to listen?
During the war, I rested my trust in the British people. Time after time, I warned them of the dangers ahead.
Today, it's on the estates, huge conglomeration of estates all over East London. We've never heard the word racialism.